Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry we're starting late. We're just waiting for one other participant to join us, but we're about to begin now. There is a question that came up, a mistake in the program. This is the correct time, 4 to 5:30 for this session on the ANCSA curriculum. So I'm sorry, I apologize for that mistake in the program. Let's get started. By way of background, this.
Charleen Fisher.
Charleen, you're in?
Sorry to interrupt.
Hang on, we're trying to pull Charleen Fisher in all the way from Fairbanks or maybe even Beaver up on the Yukon River.
Charleen. So funny. Okay, now I see you there.
Cody, have you got her?
She should be getting an invitation right now.
We live in a very weird time.
Well, it reminds me. It reminds me of the Serum Run. There was that wonderful book, The Longest Mile, or The Cruelest Mile, I guess it was. And it was this whole big discussion about whether the Serum should go by dog team or whether it should go by airplane. I should tell Bathsheba about this. Anyway, the deal was that they finally decided to do it by dog team. And the reason was they technically could do it. Hi, Charleen. I'm just in the middle of a story. We'll get back to the program. Technically, they could have done it by airplane. Airplanes were flying, but there wasn't the support system. The surest way to get the Serum to Nome was by dog team. So the surest way for us to do a Zoom conference or a crowdcast conference is for us to stand outside and to shout as loud as we can all the way to Fairbanks or Beaver, wherever we are. Okay, by way of introduction, thank you all for your patience. And we're joining the session this afternoon on curriculum. And just by way of introduction, we have with us Charleen, who is going to moderate the session. We have Mike Caulfield, Mike Hoyt, and Amy Galloway. And each of you will provide more information about your background as we go on. But you should know that this session developed out of the volume number 3 of the guide, which is the curriculum section of the ANCSA curriculum, the ANCSA guide to sources. And so Mike is the author of that. But as we developed that, we thought we really need to hear from teachers. We really need to hear about people who are out there teaching ANCSA, teaching Alaska history, teaching Alaska Native history, and some of their experiences. And we thought that this would be of interest to the audience at the Alaska Historical Society. So that's the reason why we're doing this. So now I'll turn it over to Charleen. Charleen, glad to have you.
Well, can you all hear me? I have been on. I just have been in limbo somewhere. So I'm just started texting random and I didn't see anybody, but I'm so happy to be here and join you. I wonder if it would be possible to see our slides, because we could start that image and I can initiate the session.
So you need your slides, Charleen?
Yeah.
Because they've got mine too, but you want yours up.
Yep. No.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes. I'm seeing that with screen sharing, I've maxed out the number of video sources. Is there who's speaking last? Maybe can I temporarily kick you out and bring you back on after these slides are done? I apologize.
Who are you going to kick out? You can kick me out if you need to.
Okay, and then I'll bring you back, Will. I appreciate the sacrifice.
It's all right.
Thank
He's
you.
going to go to the bar.
Hold on. Okay, we'll be in touch.
No. What is happening?
Sorry, I didn't realize that this would that the screen sharing would count against me. Charlene, pulling up your slides right now. Okay. Do you see them there?
Yep. Be great if you could be on page 1.
Yes, they seem to be playing automatically. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. We do appreciate your attendance to this session. This is the session titled Teaching ANCSA at 50. We'll go over and highlight the guide to the sources. Here, I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Schneider, Dr. Bill Schneider, Uncle Bill to me, and I will wait until he's on. So if we could go to the next slide. So our convener is William Schneider, and he can introduce himself more if he's able to return and join the show. He's been a professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks for many years and worked at the Elmer Rasmussen Library and founded the oral history department there. So also, just as a side note, he lived in the village of Beaver, where I'm from, and did his doctoral research there and was adopted into my family by my grandmother. And so to me, he's Uncle Bill. So let's go on to the next slide. When Uncle Bill returns, he wanted to do an honoring of the life of Jenny Bell Jones, professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks here in the Department of Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development. Jenny Bell Jones was an important part of our department for many, many years and taught ANCSA as one of her primary topics, and also worked on different curriculum materials, including a unpublished textbook. So hopefully that will be finished one day, but is not yet. So to the next slide. So as part of our dialogue agreements, the First Alaskan Institute, and if this slideshow is shared on the website or not, that will be a clickable link. The image there, or you could yourselves Google it and look them up. They're listed online. But the First Alaskan Institute has dialogue agreements. And so there are also meeting agreements that are very similar. But I just chose these because we would like to have a conversation. And so you can see them there. And I'll just briefly mention my screen with the sharing is very small. So excuse my glasses. But in every chair, a leader. And this recognizes all of our unique talents and interest and knowledge, and then speak with care for others. So in situations in historical context, it's excellent to have care for others and really to be conscious of our individual perspectives and value each other's time. So that's always important to listen to each other and to listen deeply and listen to receive information and not just to react to information. Also, this is a safe space for meaningful conversation. And so if difficult conversations do happen, then this is a place where we're able to say what we need to say and are safe in that, um, to express that. And then always include the value of humor, and when we're dealing with issues of humanity, sometimes people react in a way that is it includes humor as a defense mechanism, but also just as the joy of being with each other. So including that as well, and then be present and be engaged. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and if you have questions, go ahead and message us in the chat. So also interactive on this slide is this Indigenous land acknowledgement, and you can click on that, but you could also Google it. And so this is a website out of Canada that shows the Indigenous people for all of the Americas, and I'm currently sitting on the ancestral grounds of Gwich'in and Gwich'in people, where Beaver is in a meeting place between the Gwich'in people and the Gwich'in people. But I think Uncle Bill is maybe on the lands of the Benti Kanaga in Fairbanks. I'm not sure if he went to Anchorage or not, but those are the lands of the Dena'ina. So thank you very much for that time to do a land acknowledgement. And feel free to use that resource in your own work. And so to the next slide. Okay, and so for introduction, there's a picture of myself there. I'm a professor at the Department of Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development at UAF, and have adjuncted and then just gone full-time these last couple of years. And before that, I've had a long career of working in K-12 and worked in the Yukon Flats School District, where my village is located, taught in my home community, and then also worked for the Fairbanks North Star Borough for a couple of years, and as a administrator. And so also I'm going to do a brief Gwich'in introduction and then allow the panel to go ahead and introduce themselves. So Drin Gwinzi Shalaknai, Shojri Charleen Fisher Oji, Beaver Gwatsanitli. Drin Gwinzi is good afternoon. Shalaknai, all my relatives. My name is Charleen Fisher, and I'm from the village of Beaver. So yeah, welcome, and welcome to our panel, and please take some time to introduce yourself to our audience. So I guess, Mike, you're at the top, so do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, be happy to. I am a retired teacher, much as Uncle Bill is. He's retired too from UAF, and I taught at the Katchmack Bay campus of UAA, which is a meeting place between Alutiiq people and Dena'ina people who inhabited and lived for many, many centuries and for millennia in this region. But my ancestry, I think, is from Ireland and Northern England. So I've been a guest here for the entire scope of my life. But I very early on got in my work, got involved in teaching history at local levels, teaching history at state levels back in the Midwest, and then moved to Alaska in the late 1990s and became the director of the Pratt Museum in Homer. And from there, moved into the classroom at the Katchmack Bay campus. And there I was able to teach a lot of different history classes, but always taught Alaska history. I've only been able to teach Alaska Native history as an outsider. I'm not Alaska Native. As a not as a course of its own. It was always a part of, say, Alaska history or some period in Alaska history. We always had large segments of those classes be devoted to Alaska Native experiences. And so I've had this long running interest in teaching Alaska Native studies, even though I'm not an Alaska Native and I probably have no right to be teaching Alaska Native studies. I can at least point people in the right direction. And that's what got me involved in the Alaska Historical Society, was trying always to find the right direction. And that ultimately led to this project. And with ANCSA being always a key feature of the conversation about Alaska history, the society wanted to recognize the 50th anniversary of that incredible and very important ongoing act. And the folks on the committee asked me if I would embrace and somehow take on the educational resources portion of the project. The heavy lifting of the project was done by scholars like Will Schneider and Bill Parham and people of that sort, who did the research. It went into the archives and libraries and accumulated this massive amount of important information about what happened over the last 50 years. It's actually before those 50 years began. And so we have in this large document of the Guide to ANCSA at 50, mostly it's the original material, the source material that scholars and teachers and, well, anybody, village leaders, community leaders, corporate leaders, whomever wants to use these resources in order to inform themselves or to develop the way they inform other people about the Alaska Native experience with respect to ANCSA. It's an amazingly rich and detailed account of what happened, but it's not without controversy. And one of the things that emerges very quickly is that not everybody was agreed ANCSA was a good thing. And that's a conversation that continues. So it's an amazing thing, and it's an important thing nationally, perhaps internationally, but it's not necessarily a settled issue. And so as I started to wrestle with the idea of what sort of resources do we need to put together, or should we put together, to help people teach about ANCSA, there were, of course, all sorts of people involved in this. And the good news is that in programs such as Alaska School, with educators like Paul Unktukuk, the structure of teaching about ANCSA was originally and most forcefully, and continues to be, an Alaska Native driven way of pedagogy, of teaching. But others have joined the conversation, joined the research, and joined the way in which we present the topics in this for this issue. The piece that the committee eventually wanted me to focus on were what we've come to call enduring critical issues that go back, for example, to the issue of which we heard about the last 2 sessions ago on sovereignty. Sovereignty is an issue that is what boiled up at that time back in 1970, 71, and it boils up yet today. So it's not, as I said, a settled issue, but it's an exceedingly important one. And there's a lot of documents and a lot of conversations that can be held about that issue of sovereignty. What does it mean? What's its legality? Where's it going? And so on. And this is just one of the enduring critical issues. And that's how we began to structure the teaching resources. What would it take to teach that? What sort of contacts, what sort of links? Who's out there, such as whether it's a law office or archive or Alaska Native leaders, Alaska Native youth, who should be in the conversation? well, obviously everybody should be in the conversation, but what would a teacher embrace in order to develop a program within their classroom or within their community on what it means to be a part of ANCSA, to have ANCSA be a part of their lives. So that's how this thing came about, and how I got involved with it is essentially as an outsider, but as a professional historian and as a professional teacher, and simply as a person who could be a builder, not a craftsperson. I didn't create. I tried to build by taking what other people have created and put them together in one place. So in this volume 3, which we'll look at a little more detail, there are, for instance, some syllabi that Gordon Puller developed as a classic university level curricula syllabus for teaching ANCSA, teaching Alaska Native Studies across the board, and same with Paul Ungatuk. So we've been trying to guide teachers to those kind of resources, but also to some of the conferences that have been held every 10 years since ANCSA was passed, which have amazing amounts of information by people who lived it, who continue to live what ANCSA is all about and where it's taking people. So they're very important ways of having a conversation as well. I need to shut up. I'm retired from the classroom, and but I'm still trying to be active as an online teacher and in organizations like the Historical Society. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Mike, for that overview and your work on this project, and for leading this session. And thank you so much. So Amy, you're next on the screen. So could you introduce yourself to us, please?
Sure. Thank you, Charlene. I'm pleased to be here. So I am a 24-year public school teacher here in Alaska. And I started my teaching career actually as a teacher's aide in Glen Allen schools and in Copper Center schools in Otna country. And then I got my teaching degree up at UAF. I originally was an archaeologist, and then I got my teaching degree at UAF, and I taught in Nuiqsut up on the North Slope, and I taught in Homer. And then I settled here in Fairbanks and I teach high school civics and history at West Valley High School here in Fairbanks, Alaska. And right now I'm teaching government and political economics and Alaska studies. And I've taught Alaska studies on and off my whole career, as well as government. And so I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I also am an immigrant to Alaska. I was born and raised in New York and have only lived here for 30 years. But thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Amy, and we appreciate your work with students all over the state and your life's work, actually. And we're honored to have you, and just excited for your knowledge and ideas about pedagogical approaches and teaching strategies and a lot of those fun things. So we also have Michael Hoyt, and could you introduce yourselves to us?
Yakayuk Satini Katuhan, Aktatsin, Yuhadu Sak, Gash, Tietan Nachsati, Tihitu Sakanaka Hidi, Skatkwandach, Achishash, Kiksadi, Achtachanuhu, Nanya Ai, Achtachanuhu, Anupiak. So my name is Mike Hoyt. My Tlingit names are Aktatsin and Gash. I'm Tlingit on my mom's side and my dad's side, and Inupiaq on my mom's side as well. Currently teaching up here in Nome. This is my 5th year up here, I guess, and then taught for a couple years down in Juneau as well. I teach social studies and language arts, depends on the year really, and I'm an adjunct teacher for UAF and UAS for a couple classes as well. I think that about sums it up. So.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And I appreciate all of your involvement in this project, in this panel. And for those in the audience, we've had several emails back and forth and drafts, and it's been really nice to work with everybody. And we're all excited to be here. So to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this panel is in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of ANGSA, and so taught in classrooms, and we're gonna have different suggestions about this topic in your overall social studies curriculum, and then different ways and strategies for engaging students in their own learning in a classroom environment, but also in the public with issues raised by the Act and its implementation. So the next slide, please. Okay, so while you can stop sharing my presentation now, Cody, and then go ahead and start with Mike. So in the break, in a few moments for him to load that, I have put a link to the Alaska Historical Society blog, which has accompanying links to the guide. For those of you on the session, you could click on that and follow along or look at the resources while Mike is speaking. For historical context, I think ANGSA is, and there's been several, I think a couple, 3 sessions before us talking about the Act. And so for historical context, it was passed December 18, 1971. And so that was 50 years ago. And it was Public Law 92-203, signed into law by President Nixon. And yeah, there we go. I have additional information that I'll share after Mike is done sharing about the guide.
Yeah, we were overwhelming the system. So I just have a couple of slides to give you some fundamental information about this part of the guide. This is the cover of volume 3. Let's see if I can make this happen the way it's supposed to, which is to click and travel there. So where this lives, volume 3, it's not a bound volume you go find in a library. It's digital, it's online. And there are a couple of places to find it. One that is less familiar, I put here, it's called ScholarWorks. It's a digital repository at UAF, and that has all of these documents. So it's like 1,200 pages of stuff. So that's why it's not bound up in a book. It's too big. But digital makes this possible. It's also a part of the Alaska I'm going to change the slide this one. So at the Alaska Historical Society website, there is the volume 3 is available. It's as a guide, and it takes you to a lot of these documents, especially all the documents that are in a PDF form. I'm sorry. And in a PDF form, we couldn't just put it out there. We had to have somewhere for it to live. And so it lives here in the Alaska Historical Society in this segment. And I've just tried to highlight with this red line that it's easy to find if you go to the Alaska history area, and you'll find this guide to the sources. And let me see if I can get to another slide like this one. And so here's the PDF resources for teaching Alaska history. So for instance, that would involve the guide itself. It also involves a number of letters, like the famous letter that Willie Hensley wrote to demand whose land is Alaska Natives' land. And that kind of original document you'll find here, and you can bring it up for a classroom. talk about it and discuss it, where it comes from in particular, but where, of course, did it lead the public conversation about land claims. So that's what you'll find in the website are links to these. Let's see if I can do this thing. And there's another unpublished document that you'll find in here, for instance, and these are just examples of what are in here. There's several pages of these, and it's this is an essay or a presentation made by Steve Haycox, also another retired professor from UAA, entitled "Shock and Awe," and he gave this presentation last year, and it's a very positive look at ANCSA. He recognizes all sorts of issues and controversial issues that have come up with respect to ANCSA, but in his essay "Shock and Awe," he tends to focus on the positive aspects of it. What are the successes of the corporate model, but also what are the challenges to tribal peoples? What are the challenges to subsistence? What are the challenges to the whole idea of sovereignty and so on? They don't go away just because, in some respects, this is has been a very positive experience. So it's that kind of document you'll find here. You don't really find them anywhere else. So you can only find them at the Alaska. That's what I put in here in the Alaska Historical Society's website as a PDF document you can just click on. Use it in class, study it yourself, use it in class. It's a lot of interesting tools involved there. But I think, Charlene, that's what I have to say about where this is. Oops, there's Gordon Puller. So let's go back. I was going to just acknowledge Gordon and Paul as two. Well, let me go ahead and bring Paul up. Paul's here. He's well known. Gordon just passed away about a year ago. And there's Paul Unkatuk, who are these magnificent educators who have done so much to establish the foundations for what it takes to teach these topics. But I'm going to leave that for now and stop the sharing. Oops, this is too many. So, so that's my little introduction. That's what the volume is. It has many different components to it. Apart from introductory essays, there's the act itself, and there's a history of the act, and so there's a historical introduction to it. And then there are some of the basic tools for doing an online course. Some of those documents I just mentioned that you could use and share and use as discussion topics. And then there's a whole segment devoted to what I've called ANCSA detractors, those who believe that this is just another version of the old federal termination policy, trying to do away with tribes by getting them focused differently, creating this model of corporations that would, in effect, destroy the tribal model. So there are people who still argue about that and are still concerned about that. And then the critical, enduring critical issues for discussion is another segment of this. Then I've added an appendix that has a whole lot of stuff in it that's just useful to a teacher. There's a general resource inventory. What are the books? What are the articles? What are the documentaries and so on that are useful? And then there are additional resources and locations of those resources that are, again, useful for the teacher. Much of those are video. There are supporting resources of various kinds that are helpful to teachers. It's connections to the academic world in particular. And then there are regional and corporate connections. They're important. They're different, but they're important. And then there are the university classes and native governance and self-governance and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of material, a lot of what we think is useful material. But it's also in a state of flux. And we invite people, any teachers out there who attempt to use this, to find its flaws and tell us about them. Tell us how we could fix that. What new documents? What documents are not correct? What have we misjudged about some of the material that's here? So it's a work in progress.
Okay, thank you. So
yeah, when
thank
they
you,
see
Mike, for that overview. And I hope everybody has the links that have been put in the chat. Thank you, Sue, for putting the ScholarWorks link in and the Alaska Historical Society website in general. And then I think if you want to bring the slide, I think, I think it'd be better to have, so I have a couple of different pages that are just for conversation. And honestly, I'd rather have Uncle Bill back than the slides. So if we could just in our minds think about pedagogy and those kinds of things and different practices. And then we'll wait for Dr. Schneider or Uncle Bill to come back into the session.
he's a great teacher. He'll add a lot.
I'm back.
Okay. So thank you for coming back, Uncle Bill. And we skipped over the slides. I don't know if you were able to watch along, but I wonder if you wanted to say anything else about Jenny and her life and there. So if you would like to go ahead and say that now before we start our conversation.
Thank you. I would like to say something about Jenny. I didn't know about Jenny until a couple of years ago. And when I was writing the essay that appears in Volume 1, I was looking for members of the Native community that had historical background that could critique what I had written. And Jenny was suggested to me, and she read the essay and made some really important comments. And I really appreciated the effort she put into that. And over the years, I began to notice her in newspaper articles in that where she took up critical issues and brought them to the public's attention. And I was really just tremendously impressed with this woman. And I tried to rope her into lots of presentations and lots of activities. And she always refused graciously. And I never understood why until she finally said, I need to tell you, I'm not well. I'm dying. And it came as a shock to me. And of course, I felt a little badly that I had tried to push her so hard to do things. But anyway, when she passed and I learned the news of her passing, I realized how important a person she was in my recent years. And then as Mike was working on the curriculum material, her curriculum work at UAF became a big part of that and an important part. And I just have a lot of respect for her. So I appreciate the chance to say something about Jenny.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think a lot of us feel that way and are similarly moved by her passing and her body of work that now we hopefully will have published sometime soon. So is it, in listening to our introduction, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, there is something I wrote down as you guys were talking, and that was a question. You know, I get very excited about how Alaska Native history could be a full semester length course, could be a whole year's course, and I kept wondering, how would I do this if I was a teacher and I had to teach history in general, and how would I fit it? How would I quote fit it in? And why would I use the word fit it in when maybe the population of people I was working with, maybe this was the most important thing for me to be working on with them, and then extend out from that to other forms of history, to other forms of knowledge, such as civics. And so that's my rambling at this point, but maybe Mike Hoyt or Amy could comment on that, because I know that you work under big constraints.
Mike, I'll let you go first if you want. Or not, because, okay, as you get off mute. So I'll go. So I think it's a really good question, and I don't think it's an answer of fit it in. I think you're right, and that's often a curricular concept that I have to teach all of U.S. history in 1 year, or I have to teach all of government in a semester. And Alaska Studies is a semester course, but it's all of Alaska history, not just Alaska Native history. But I think as a teacher over the years, what's important is that Alaska Native studies and history isn't just done in Alaska history classes or Alaska Studies classes, is that it's an integral part of every class. And so that when I teach U.S. history is it's a history of colonization. It is, and so it's very easy to and really mandatory to include Alaska Indigenous peoples prior to contact in and of themselves as civilizations, and then how that contact with colonizers impacts the history, not just of the Indigenous peoples, but of the colonizing country itself. And so I teach Alaska history, I teach Indigenous history and ANCSA in all my classes. I teach it in U.S. history. I teach it in my Alaska government class. I mean, I have students who, if they are tribal members, have treble citizenship. They're citizens of a tribe, they're citizens of a state, and they're citizens of a nation. And so like all of that, like that knowledge and that history is taught in all classes. And I think the work that needs to be done is we need to write new Alaska state history standards, which haven't been done for 20 years. We need to write new state standards, and that Alaska Native history has to be woven throughout all courses and not only in an Alaska Studies course, so that we see the importance and the interconnectedness of that history everywhere and not just in special topics courses. That said, I think there should still be special topics courses, but I think it's easy and mandatory to be fitting it in everywhere. I don't know if Mike Hoyt can get off mute. There he is. Good.
I can, yeah. I just wanted to make sure you were finished. I think you bring up a lot of really great points, by the way, in terms of how this is stuff that can be integrated into a lot of classes, and it could also stand alone in its own courses. And that's essentially how it ended up being for me in terms of how I've taught it. It's something that has been things I've kind of woven into other classes, whether it's Alaska Studies or U.S. history or government classes, you know, especially when we talk about things like citizenship. When did Alaska Natives get citizenship? And a lot of my students don't know that and didn't when I first started teaching here, that it wasn't really taught in a lot of their courses. And then a lot of the more Alaska Native focused courses that I was teaching were electives initially. And as I've gotten more experience teaching and gotten a little bit more, I guess maybe credibility would be a good word, as a more experienced teacher, it has been something that has become more consistently taught. I teach a colonization of Alaska course, both for UAF and then a dual credit version for the high school students. And I co-teach that class with my wife as well, who is a lawyer for Coeric here. And so we teach a tribal government class, for example, and a tribal management class. And so a lot of those same history aspects end up playing into that course as well. And one thing that's been really, I think, exciting about that is when we first started teaching tribal government, tribal management, and some of the Alaska Native specific history, they were some of the smaller courses. Like there was only, for example, only 4 students one year signed up for tribal government. This year, it's actually kind of flipped, where tribal government, we had to limit it because I literally only had 23 desks in my room and I had 28 students signed up for that class. And the other government class, the one that everyone usually takes, you can now take either one for that government credit that is required. That one has, I think, 10 students versus the 23 that we ended up with in my tribal government class. And so we're seeing some of this shift where as it's becoming more offered and the students realize that it's an option, they are gravitating towards that and wanting to hear that stuff. And ultimately, I think it does kind of connect back to just best practices, right? If you want to teach somebody, the best way you're going to teach them is by connecting to what's going on in their lives. If you want to ask students about Washington, D.C., they'll have some idea of what's going on there. But if you start asking them about, hunting regulations, or you start asking them, oh, it looks like my video disappeared. That's okay. If you start asking them about tribal corporations or tribes in our regions, they're going to know quite a bit about those things. And so when you can make those connections and start seeing that in the classroom, especially up here in Nome, we have about an 80% Native population in the schools, for example. Students really, they feel it and they can see how it connects to their life a lot more. And if you don't have those kind of connections, it's really hard for them to care. One thing I like to do, for example, my U.S. history classes, I like to pull out the textbook that we have and I flip to the index and I say, how many times do you guys think Alaska shows up in this book? There's 1,000 pages. It shows up twice. And the students are always just kind of blown away of well, did nothing happen here? Did nothing important happen in Alaska? It's no, that's not it at all. It's just that Alaska history for the rest of the country is just an afterthought. And if we teach it like we would teach history down in California or Texas, and nothing against those states, but they're just not going to worry a whole lot about Alaska. And that's not going to work for Alaskan students. And so we have to bring these things in. And the students respond. The students respond to that. I've got a lot of students that might not care a whole lot about history, but if you start asking about their home village, they start knowing what to talk about. And all of a sudden, they care about history again. So, yeah.
And I want to, Mike is brilliant with that. It's congratulations on that class. I wish that every school district could, incorporate that in, or at least the state of Alaska could share it out to, that's just phenomenal. And I think as a non-native and a non-native perspective, and I teach in a school that's probably 75% non-native. My school has about 25% Alaska Native and American Indian students. It's really important for the non-native students to also learn this because there are so many misconceptions. And often Alaska Native students are so easily marginalized because they're not seen in the curriculum. And they're also marginalized because they're a minority in the building. And so I think it's super duper important to also include it in all courses and in standalone courses because knowledge and factual knowledge really breaks down racist or ignorant or just unknown misconceptions that have to do with very specifically with INCSA and the effects of INCSA.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that point about having non-native students take it as well. We do have a lot of non-native students at the school that also take that class, and they're curious because they see, corporations around town and want to know more about that. So I think that's a really great point. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. Very thoughtful. And also, Mike, for your teaching dual credit opportunities for students also to sort of get a jump start on their university experience. And I do appreciate your work in that. And I was thinking like, my doctoral project, my dissertation was largely about Indigenous uh, education frameworks and Indigenous education in general, I guess. So rethinking sort of what was Gwich'in pedagogy as an instructional strategy. And so I was wondering, what type of teaching strategies, Indigenous or place-based or those kinds of teaching strategies have you used when engaging your students in these topics? Content, either the content or maybe working with elders to learn the content or engaging in some sort of civic project to go to, maybe some function or something about ANCSA, but in some context, what kind of strategies have you used and found successful?
That's a really great question, and I think there's a lot to kind of unpack with it. That's why I'm trying to scribble notes here. I think for me, there's a couple ways I like to approach that. And the first thing, I guess, is that I bring a lot of Indigenous history and a lot of Indigenous storytelling into how I teach, and it's become a lot easier as I've gone. Where the first time I taught that. Tried to teach this as a standalone class, it was just trying to like cram so much into one thing. And what's really cool now is, we've been doing this for 4 years. A lot of the students have taken history of colonization in Alaska, and now they're taking tribal government, or they're going to take tribal management down the road. And so they already know some of these topics, and they can see the connections as it goes, rather than trying to cram everything in all at once. A lot of Indigenous cultures in Alaska are going to rely on our history and our storytelling to kind of found our identity and our connection to the land. And so when we look at questions of land ownership, which is ultimately, I think, what drives ANCSA, I look especially to William Paul, who is from the same clan that I am, the Teton clan. And a lot of what he brings in is looking at our specific history and our stories on Prince of Wales Island when he's talking about ANCSA. And he's looking at our traditional government systems in Wrangell and how those are guiding us. And so ultimately, ANCSA kind of grows up out of that. And so I try to point that out to students. And so then we'll start looking at what are some of the Indigenous stories around Alaska? How do they talk about government? And how do they talk about connections to land? How do they understand contact history? And so when you bring in some of those stories, students, they kind of perk up because everyone has stories, or they've heard stories from their families anyway. And so it's just kind of a good connection for them to kind of make. So I think that would be a really big part of it. Another big part of it would be something like NNYLO, Nome Native Youth Leadership Organization, or other such Native clubs, essentially, where for NNYLO, that's the club that I head up that's focused on Native leadership, for example. We're heading down to Elders in Youth in just a couple weeks, and we've gone in past years, and we've gone for the digital ones the past few years. And it's been a really great experience for students to meet other Alaska Native students from around the state, and to hear about things that they want, and to help, write resolutions, for example, to help kind of make their voices heard. And so they can start to see like, oh, this isn't just a random thing Mr. Hoyt talks about in class. Like, there's real things that we could do. And so that for me is the really exciting thing, is to see students understand that they can take these things and apply it outside the school, and kind of have that jumpstart into going into college or being activists in other ways. And the other thing I try to do is connect it to the students' lives as much as I can, and to ask them to talk to their parents or grandparents or aunties and uncles and say like, all right, who are the leaders from our town? Like, I can tell you about some of the leaders from Southeast where I was living, and I do have ancestry connections up here, but I didn't grow up in Nome, so I don't know who some of the leaders are. And so then it kind of puts them on the it puts them in the driver's seat to think about, okay, well, who are our leaders here? Who knows some of this history? And that's been really exciting to see students realize, like, oh, my great grandpa was somebody that spoke up about this. My auntie was somebody that has been speaking up about this for 20 years. And they start to see those connections and that they can do that too. So that's one of my favorite parts of my job, actually.
Awesome.
Mike,
Thank
can
you.
you give, I'm sorry, Mike, can you give a story or two about that? About a student who went to an elder and heard a story that reflected that elder's involvement in the land claims fight or the land claims struggle?
Yeah, I'll try to give two quick ones because I feel like I'm talking too much, but two that come to mind. The first one would be, I had a student who was very a great hunter. He's always coming in and showing me photos of something that he had been out hunting that previous week. And when we were talking about some of this history, I knew who his grandpa was and that he'd gone hunting with him a lot. And in talking with his grandfather, I realized that his grandfather's grandfather was somebody that was very, very active. Nick Gray was his name for Nome in particular. And so when that student took that history of colonization in Alaska class, that was something that I had them focus on, was asking, like, okay, like, what did your great-great-grandpa do about this? How did he speak up about this? And, I had another student from his family's traditionally from Kotzebue, and his grandfather, a similar one. The other one that actually just happened yesterday, I think, I have a student who brought in some speeches that their grandmother had written down and given back in the 90s. And so they brought it in as so I could make some copies of it and hand it out to the rest of NNYLO to see that these are things that people have been doing for a while and that our families have been doing for a while. It's not just things that appear in textbooks, but things that have very real connections for them. So those would be two or three kind of quick stories. You're
making goose pimples here on me as you're talking, because we have primary sources too about Nick Gray,
Yeah.
and some of these other issues. It would be wonderful to connect students with these sources, and I don't know whether that would come from their personal story about their great grandfather, and then introducing this out that and here's a picture of him in the hospital when he was very, very ill, and he played such an important part at the beginning of the AFN convention and bringing people together. That's really exciting stuff, Mike.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot I think that could be done with that. And one thing that I want to try to do along those lines, if you've ever been to the school in the high school in Kotzebue, for example, they've got in their cafeteria a lot of portraits of elders from their community. And I'd love to do something similar like that in our school, where they can see that there are people from our town that have been doing this for a long time, very successfully, oftentimes, on a statewide level or even on an international or national level.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the
Amy, we're interested to hear what you have to say. I'm sorry, was that you, Mike Hoffield?
Oh yeah, well, I was just going to add in a little footnote that really enjoyed hearing what Mike's saying about these same stories and the whole issue of leadership. There's a whole world of traditional leadership techniques and values and so on that are, they're unique to the Alaska Native experience, and they work. And one of the syllabi that I collected for this project is a model being developed by Joel Isaac for the Anchorage School District about Alaska Native leadership, and using the Alaska Native historical experiences, good and bad, to instill leadership skills in young people. So it's out there and it's building. I mean, what you're doing is extremely important.
Great, thank you for that, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, the work that like hearing about those stories and seeing the connection, it's really neat to like kind of watch that happening in front of our eyes. So in terms of pedagogical strategies, like it's really easy to just depend on the content to try and get in and make relevance, but the strategies are critically important. And so some of the things I have used in my classroom that have had really strong efficacy, I would say that the three biggest ones are one, 100% storytelling. Now, in a bigger community like mine, it's really hard to get my kids out of the classroom and into places. But bringing people into my classroom is really important. So I think one of the best resources I have are my former students. So I have a number of former students, Alaska Native students who have gone up to UAF and gotten their degrees, whether it's in Alaska Native Studies or something connected, and they come back into my classroom. And not only are they like, hey, here is what your future can hold if you choose to have that, but they really speak in such a relevant way to students about, and they speak very specifically about INCSA. And they'll talk about, hey, I'm here on a scholarship from my Alaska Native corporation, and here's what that means. And they talk about, it's really powerful to hear my former students teach me about things like generational trauma and the power and why why it's necessary to have those scholarships. Because in a school like mine, you can get blowback from the non-Native students, like, well, why do you get that? Right. And it's like, those are the questions that need to be addressed. And to have it be addressed by my former students and young people that my current students can then see as role models really, really is very powerful. I would say another element that is connected to storytelling as well is I do this project in my Alaska history class called Genius Hour, where students get 20% of their time, or basically like 2.5 hours a week to work on any project of their choice. So they get to drive it, and it's learning by doing, not learning by just listening or talking. So learning by doing. And sometimes I have a theme around it. Like I'll say it has to relate to something, but often it's really open. And some of the projects over the years have been like, one of my Alaska Native students reconnected with a grandma and learned how to bead. Another connected with some Alaska Native leaders and educators in our district and helped make like this little alphabet book. Another worked with a group of students and worked on being climate defenders and creating an assembly at our school and wrote a song. Actually, I mean, this was Quanah Chasing Horse Potts who actually was doing this. So, I mean, like given the chance and the space and the resources to connect out into the community. And part of it is they have to find a community mentor to help them with this. So strategies like that, where it's learned by doing and getting them out into the community and giving them unstructured time that they learn to structure themselves, I think is a really, is a way to kind of decolonize the pedagogical strategies, at least for me to be able to step back and allow that. I think the last thing that I haven't done it in my Alaska Studies class, but so much, but I use it in my government and U.S. history classes connected to INCSA, is that leadership. Like, so Howard Rock, right, is a phenomenal like role model and for so many other, how do we use First Amendment rights? How does the actual traditional Western colonized curriculum, how can that be used by Indigenous peoples to then create the world they need to have within the Western system? And so we study leaders who are part of the INCSA movement, and then work backwards, and they identify leaders in their community, and then they record oral history interviews. And then those recorded oral history interviews can turn into students making documentaries about the person if it's enough, or sometimes we just have then a library of resources. And that goes alongside a project I do with veterans then. And so they're kind of working side by side. So that's just another, when we think about strategies, I think a really powerful strategy is actually doing the work of oral history and teaching them how to be oral historians, recording the oral history, getting the release from the people to share their stories, and then starting our own libraries of oral histories that can then be shared in perpetuity. But really, it's that gift to the family and the gift to the person of whose oral history was gathered, and then you give it to them. And so that's something that I think I would like for me to, try and develop in my school. I think it would be great for our schools to just have their own little oral history depositories.
Yeah, beautiful answers. Thank you so much for your contributions, your work with the students, and like your foundational work with them in their lives as advocates and as Alaska Natives or Alaskans, so thank you for that. So as you were speaking, I'm noticing behind you, Amy, there are several maps of Alaska. And how do you teach thinking critically, having objective discussions about some of these other cascading issues with regard to land management, language loss, climate change, all of these huge issues that you have around. And, there's other ideas about critical thinking and then critical research having to tie to, responsibility to future generations, reciprocity, to giving back to your community, establishing relationships, really being relevant to what's happening in our Native communities and the things that we're dealing with. Could you talk a little bit about how you put that to students and get them thinking about some of these very, very difficult issues that all adults are dealing with?
Yeah. So it's actually kind of the foundation, especially of most of my courses, is to have in the curriculum guide or in the document that Mike and others created, to have those essential questions. And so I have essential questions for each unit and then within the unit, and most of them end in, sometimes it's a debate, but more it's usually a structured academic conversation. And so that are wrestling with these topics. So I guess I don't necessarily think students can be biased, and I think it's okay to be biased, and I don't necessarily teach them to be unbiased. Their lived identity and their lived experience, I think, is very important, and we all come in with a bias. I'm not going to say that we're unbiased. I think what I encourage my students to do is recognize their bias, question it, be curious, be willing to look around, and then find evidence ultimately to support their most informed conclusion. And so what we really work on here is understanding that historically relevant curriculum comes with people's identity and their history, and that they're going to be biased there. And what we need to do is kind of learn to understand other people's bias. But most importantly is that we understand our own bias. And then the critical thinking part, I think, really comes in with providing evidence. So we have fishbowl discussions, we have debates, we have structured academic debates, critical conversations in which students are engaging topics. What I do is I just look at the news and I take the news and then we research and then we'll have debates or these conversations. So the airboat on the river. We look at, drilling for oil in Anwar. We look at the erosion. We look at climate change and how it's impacting villages. And then we quite literally take 2 weeks, research those issues, and then have debates or structured conversations that address that, where students take a stand and, most importantly, provide solutions. And then oftentimes I'll have their solutions to lawmakers. And so they then present those solutions to whoever is going to be in a decision-making position. But we do a lot of debate, and I do not shy away from it. I do not shy away from controversial topics. And I think the key is creating very brave classrooms. And so I think the foundation for me for this, because this is how I run my class, is at the very beginning to teach students how to be brave, how to be responsible, how to be respectful, and how to honor each other's identity. And so I spend weeks at the beginning of my class creating a social contract and using the foundation of that so that students' lived identities are respected in the classroom, and that we learn how to agree and disagree with each other's ideas. But we don't disagree with people. We disagree with ideas. So I think really the foundation is taking a lot of those kind of values and principles you said at the beginning and making sure that is the foundation of every class, so that we're a community of learners together, exploring and learning together. We are not a bunch of students trying to own each other in a debate. Like we're a community of learners.
Thank you, Amy. Beautifully said. Mike, you want to contribute? Mike Hoyt.
Okay, I was gonna say, which mic do you want here? I think what Amy talked about really kind of hits everything perfectly. That idea of just kind of embracing controversy is so critical, I think, of what we do, and embracing the fact that, like, just naturally you're gonna have some bias when you write. It's gonna be in there, but we can acknowledge that it's there, and we can try to think about, like, okay, how do we put ourselves in someone else's shoes? How do we analyze their arguments rather than just saying, I'm trying to win this argument? Well, no, like, you have to actually understand what the other person is saying before you try to defeat them, so to speak, right? One thing I also wanted to touch on, and I'm really glad that Amy brought up the name Howard Rock, because he was somebody that had a massive influence in our region specifically, but also on a statewide level. And I really like showing students newspapers from history and looking at examples like Howard Rock, or the other one I find really interesting is newspapers that some of the students from the Sheldon Jackson School back in the 19-teens were writing, because it's an example for me to tell students, like, a lot of my students write for the school paper, and I could point to, like, yeah, Alaska Natives back then were doing the same thing, and they were calling out the boarding school experience while they were in there. A lot of them went on to be influential members of A&B and ANS, and so to bring those things in and show them that they could use those things, and that it could be more than just writing about whatever topic. It could be something that they can address to important current events. And anytime you can make it, again, connect back to their lives and issues that they see, and to have a voice, and that's when you're going to start to get more buy-in. That's when you're going to get them to be excited about what's going on in class. I often tell my students that I'm not super concerned if they know, who the 16th president of the United States is. I hope they do, but it's more important that they know what that president stood for, or some of those impacts of what they did, right? Remembering certain numbers isn't exactly, to me, the important part of history. Understanding that when they read the newspaper or they look at news on their phones, they have to be critical of what they read. They have to really think about who is going to benefit from this perspective, or what perspectives might be missing, for example. So for me, those are going to be the things that really kind of tie it back And I also wanted to just kind of throw another thing in there about language. Language is another one. Studying Tlingit was actually what originally got me into teaching. Kind of ironic because I teach up in Nome now, but it's extremely, extremely important. And I mentioned earlier that my wife does teach some classes as well, and that's one of the classes that she teaches. She teaches Inupiaq classes up here, and students are getting more excited about this. The more that they kind of see that these things can be brought into the schools, whether it's tribal government classes or Alaska Native history classes, and then they're starting to see language classes. To me,
Oh no.
Mike freeze.
That's no, it's freezing up.
Well,
Unfortunately.
You know, those sustained connections just kind of blip out.
Kind of while we're waiting for Mike to jump back in, and Mike, please do jump in when as quick as you can. There is a new initiative to create Native K through 12 schools with Native curriculum. And I wonder if anyone knows more about that or what you might add in the way of a vision for that.
boy,
No.
that is my favorite topic. I don't know if anybody has a spare 24 hours for me to talk. So I think a lot of people around the state are really excited about that possibility. But of course, even when planning for opening a charter school or preparing an application, you really have to spend a lot of time in planning and working together with a group of like-minded individuals to prepare for some of the K-12 expectations. And so like student handbooks, like safety plans, like curriculum, I mean, we could spend probably days talking about curriculum for social studies alone, like not, so I think in my like dream time with my cousin who I spent a lot of time with, Paul Williams Jr., we have already sort of named our, imaginary school. We have renamed topics. We've reordered the day to honor our seasons and our ways of life. We've connected to units. We've done all these beautiful things, but yeah, I think a lot of planning is going to happen before that, and I do want to hear though the continuation of Mike Hoyt's thoughts. So thank you for the question.
Mike, go ahead.
yeah, sorry,
Mike
I know
Hoyt.
I cut off. I'm not sure if I had cut off like halfway through something that I was saying. I think I kind of finished my thought, or
Talking about the
hopefully.
importance of language.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll just reiterate it just really quick. I think when students start to see other aspects of these educational things coming in, like the history stuff, like the tribal government stuff, they start to realize that they can bring other parts of their identity into the schools, and that we offer things like those Inupiaq classes or Yup'ik classes. We're starting to see some of those grow too. It's more than just history. You can start to see it. Social studies kind of grow out from that. And you can see that starting to be brought into things like the English classes, even when they're looking at stories. So hopefully I didn't cut out that time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for finishing your thought, and really thank you all for participating. I think our session goes until 5:30, and I do think that maybe people have closing thoughts or after this discussion that they want to summarize. And Mike Caulfield, would you like to start with some closing thoughts?
I think my closing thoughts is I'm in awe of our teachers here and the kind of thinking that they're bringing to their own classrooms, their schools, and their work with students. The idea of engaging those young people in critical thinking exercises is deeply important. They are the agents of their future, and all we need to understand that is to look at how robust the voice of Alaska Native people is in this state. Unlike American Indian peoples outside, this state has a very powerful Alaska Native voice in politics and economics, and the direction that we're all going to go. They're the leaders. And I'm very much heartened by what I'm hearing you all say about training those young people. Thanks.
Before we
Thank you,
close,
Mike, for your work.
could I make a pitch? I'd like to make Penelope Goforth wrote in the chat about History Day, and I'd like to make a pitch to teachers who may be listening to this to use History Day as an opportunity to have students choose a project that relates to Alaska, and in particular to consider a project that relates to Alaska Native history and maybe to ANCSA. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to bring focus to this important part of our history.
Thank you, Uncle Bill.
Thanks, Uncle Bill.
Amy, do you have any closing thoughts?
Sure, just quickly. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure learning with all of you. And we have History Day. People, the teachers who do History Day here, we always have some great Alaska topics. So yes, History Day, plug. I guess I want to say thank you for creating the resource, because I think one of the most challenging things as a classroom teacher is that we don't have a lot of resources all in one place. There's a lot of wonderful resources, but they're not all coalesced into one place. So this resource is really lovely. So I want to thank you for creating that. And then I guess my last thought is I think ANCSA at 50 is a great way to teach critical thinking, because there's a lot of controversy, because there's a lot of work yet to be done.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a great way to talk about kind of how we can see we are constantly recommitting ourselves to a promise of being a more perfect union by getting better at this.
Well said.
Yeah. So for myself, I want to say Masi Cho to all of you for participating, and Mike Hawfield for your work, and the Alaska Historical Society for all the support and creating the documents. I think Alaska Native people in general, have exemplified many positive practices in business and all sorts of Western content areas. But I think also vitally important to have remained true to their values and committed to language revitalization and protecting our land and managing our own resources and being really good relatives to land, water, air, each other, and all other living creatures. And thinking about future generations as well as honoring our ancestors. I think we have a really hopeful future. And I think with good suggestions and work from teachers, hardworking teachers like yourselves, we just have so much to learn from each other, and our students have so much opportunity to learn about this. So thank you so much. And I want to leave the last word to Uncle Bill. So Masi Cho, everyone, and go ahead, Uncle Bill. Besides your your pitch, go ahead, sign us off.
You've made my day, all of you. Thank you. Masi Cho.
Okay.
Cody, I think we're done. Thank you for your help.